Welcome to Nightmare Fuel Stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the stories. Number depths unknown, the ocean never gives up its secrets easily. I learned this truth during my 15 years as a marine researcher, but nothing prepared me for what I discovered 4,000 meters below the surface of the North Atlantic. My name is Dr. Alina Reeves. I specialize in deep-sea topography with the Oceanic Research Institute. My work typically involves mapping unexplored regions of the ocean floor, documenting geological formations, and occasionally identifying new hydrothermal vent systems. Routine work until it wasn't. The expedition began like any other. Our research vessel, the Horizon, departed from Reykjavik on a crisp September morning. We were investigating an anomalous sonar reading detected by a passing research vessel 3 months prior. The preliminary data suggested an unusual formation approximately 260 kilometers east of Iceland, in an area we believed to be flat abyssal plain. Captain Larsen, a weathered Norwegian with 30 years at sea, seemed unusually tense as we reviewed the coordinates. "That region has stories," he said quietly. When I pressed him, he shrugged it off as old sailor's superstition. I should have listened more carefully. Our team consisted of 12 researchers and a crew of 15. My closest colleague, Dr. Marcus Chen, operated our remote submersibles, while I focused on data analysis and mapping. We'd worked together for 7 years and developed the easy rapport of scientists who trust each other's judgment implicitly. 3 days into our journey, we reached the coordinates. Initial sonar sweeps confirmed the anomaly, a significant structural formation where none should exist. The readings suggested geometric patterns inconsistent with natural geological processes. "This can't be right," Marcus said, adjusting the equipment. "The symmetry is too perfect." I stared at the preliminary renderings, a chill running down my spine despite the warm research lab. The structure appeared to be roughly circular, approximately 400 meters in diameter, with radiating lines extending outward like spokes on a wheel. "Could it be man-made?" asked Sophia, our marine archaeologist. "An ancient structure, perhaps," I shook my head. At this depth, over 4,000 meters down, no ancient civilization had the technology to build at these depths. "And no modern one would build something this size without documentation," Marcus added. We decided to deploy ROV-7, our primary remote submersible, equipped with high-definition cameras and sampling tools. As we prepared the launch, I noticed Captain Larsen making a small gesture across his chest, a sign of the cross. He caught my eye and quickly turned away. The descent took nearly 2 hours. Marcus piloted the ROV with precision while we crowded around the monitors. The water grew increasingly dark until our lights were the only illumination in that midnight world. At 38.0 meters, the ROV sensors detected a temperature anomaly. The water was 2 degrees warmer than it should have been. "Possible hydrothermal activity," I noted, though something about the perfectly consistent temperature gradient seemed wrong. At 41.0 meters, the ROV's lights caught something that made my breath catch. The seafloor wasn't the expected muddy plain. Instead, we saw what appeared to be a massive stone surface, the sediment swept clean as if by current. "But there shouldn't have been significant currents at this depth." "Are those tiles?" Sophia whispered. The camera focused on what indeed appeared to be enormous stone tiles, each perhaps 5 meters across, fitted together with mathematical precision. The pattern was unmistakable. This was not a natural formation. "Pan outward," I instructed Marcus, my voice steadier than I felt. As the ROV pulled back, the structure revealed itself. We were looking at what appeared to be a vast plaza or courtyard, bounded by enormous stone blocks that rose like walls from the seafloor. The architecture had elements reminiscent of both Mesoamerican step pyramids and something else entirely, something I couldn't quite place but that felt fundamentally wrong to my eyes. "This is impossible," Marcus said. "These structures would predate any known human civilization capable of oceanic travel by thousands of years, and the engineering required to build at this depth. Could it be a hoax?" suggested Dr. Rivera, our geologist. "Some billionaire's art project," I shook my head. "The sediment patterns suggest these structures have been here for an extremely long time, centuries at minimum." We continued exploring, guiding the ROV through what appeared to be a massive complex. We documented enormous archways, long corridors, and vast open spaces that defied explanation. The architecture followed rules that seemed almost deliberately disorienting. Angles that appeared acute from one approach revealed themselves to be obtuse from another. Distances seemed to shift unpredictably. 4 hours into our exploration, we discovered the first carvings. "Focus on that wall section," Sophia directed, pointing to a section of stone that appeared different from the rest. The camera zoomed in, revealing intricate reliefs carved into the dark stone. The images depicted humanoid figures, but with proportions that were subtly wrong, limbs too long, heads too angular. They appeared to be engaged in some form of ritual around a central figure that was larger than the others. This confirms it's artificial, Sophia said excitedly. We're looking at an unknown civilization, but something about the carvings disturbed me deeply. The central figure wasn't human at all. It had a vaguely cephalopod-like appearance, with tentacular appendages radiating from a central mass. The surrounding figures seemed to be prostrating themselves before it. Religious iconography, Sophia suggested, perhaps representing a deity. As the ROV continued its survey, we discovered more carvings, each more disturbing than the last. They seemed to tell a story: the arrival of the tentacled beings from above, their interaction with human-like figures, and scenes that appeared to depict transformation. By hour 6, we had mapped approximately 20% of the visible structure. The central plaza led to a massive building that resembled a temple. At its center was a circular depression that our scans indicated descended even deeper into the seafloor. We should collect samples, Dr. Rivera suggested, both of the stone and any sediment we can find in the protected areas. Marcus maneuvered the ROV toward one of the carved walls, extending its sampling arm. As the mechanical claw made contact with the stone, something unexpected happened. The ROV sensors detected a vibration. Seismic activity? I questioned, checking the readings. No, Marcus replied, his voice tense. It's localized to the structure itself. Before we could retract the sampling arm, the vibration intensified. On our screens, we could see a fine cloud of what looked like silt rising from the seams between the massive stones. Pull back, I ordered. Marcus reversed the ROV, but the cloud continued to expand. Then, to our horror, we realized it wasn't silt at all. The cloud consisted of tiny organisms, swarming in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. Are those bacteria? Dr. Rivera asked, leaning closer to the screen. Too large for bacteria, I replied. Some type of microorganism, but nothing I've ever seen before. The swarm surrounded the ROV, obscuring our cameras. The last image we received before losing visual contact was of the organisms beginning to aggregate into larger, more complex patterns that disturbingly resembled the carvings we'd observed. Then we lost contact completely. What happened? Captain Larson demanded, having joined us in the lab as the situation developed. Unknown, Marcus replied, frantically working the controls. We still have power, but no response from any systems. After 30 minutes of failed attempts to re-establish contact, we had to accept that ROV-7 was lost. $4 million of equipment gone, but more importantly, our primary means of investigating the structure was gone as well. That night, gathered in the ship's conference room, we debated our next steps. We should deploy ROV-8, Marcus argued, but keep it at a safer distance, and risk losing our backup too, Captain Larson countered. We should return to Reykjavik and report our findings. To whom? Sophia asked. No archaeological institution is equipped to investigate a structure at this depth, and without samples or better imagery, they might not even believe us. The military then, suggested Rivera. This could have national security implications. I remained silent, reviewing the footage we'd managed to save. Something about the structure nagged at me, a familiarity I couldn't place. The designs, the proportions. They reminded me of something I'd seen before. That night I dreamed of the structure. In my dream, I wasn't viewing it through cameras, but walking through it myself, without diving equipment, breathing normally in the crushing depths. The stone halls extended endlessly, and with each turn I felt I was drawing closer to something waiting at the center. I woke gasping, my sheets soaked with sweat. The following morning, I made the decision to deploy our backup ROV, but with modifications. We attached additional lights and reinforced the communication systems. This time, I insisted on a different approach. We would maintain a greater distance from the structure and focus on comprehensive mapping rather than direct interaction. During the second ROV's descent, I found myself in conversation with Captain Larson on the observation deck. You mentioned stories about this region, I said. What kind of stories? He sighed, gazing out at the slate-gray ocean. Old tales, fishermen who claimed their catches spoke to them in dreams after fishing these waters. Ships that returned with crew members changed, not in any way you could point to, just wrong somehow. He shrugged. Superstition, like I said, but you believe them enough to make the sign of the cross, I observed. His weathered face cracked in a humorless smile. Insurance costs nothing, Dr. Reeves. The second ROV reached the structure without incident. Keeping our distance, we began a systematic survey, creating a three-dimensional map of the entire complex. The structure was more extensive than we'd initially realized, nearly a kilometer across at its widest point, with the central temple-like building rising almost 200 meters from the seafloor. The engineering is impossible, Rivera kept saying. These blocks would weigh hundreds of tons each. The precision of their placement at this depth with these currents. As our mapping progressed, we discovered that the structure had a definite orientation. The spokes we'd observed in our initial sonar readings radiated from the central temple toward specific points. When Sophia overlaid astronomical charts, she made a disturbing discovery. These alignments, she said, pointing to her calculations, they correspond to the positions of certain stars, but not as they are now. What do you mean? I asked. These alignments would have been correct approximately 14,000 years ago, she explained. Before the end of the last ice age, the implications stunned us into silence. If Sophia was correct, this structure predated every known human civilization by thousands of years. On the third day of our investigation, we focused the ROV on the central temple structure. The entrance was a massive archway, large enough to accommodate a small ship, leading into darkness. The ROV's lights barely penetrated the gloom as Marcus carefully guided it inside. The interior was a vast chamber with a domed ceiling, supported by columns carved to resemble stylized tentacular forms. The floor sloped gently downward toward the center, where we found the circular pit we detected in our scans. It's like an amphitheater, Sophia observed, or a place of worship. The pit itself was approximately 50 meters across, a perfect circle cut into the stone floor. Our sonar indicated it descended at least another kilometer into the earth. The edges were carved with more of the strange symbols and figures we'd seen outside. Can we get closer to those carvings? Sophia requested. Marcus carefully maneuvered the ROV toward the edge of the pit. As we approached, our sensors detected the same temperature anomaly we'd noticed earlier, warmer water emanating from the depths. The carvings near the pit were different from those we'd seen elsewhere. They depicted the tentacled beings emerging from the pit rather than from above. In some scenes, they appeared to be carrying objects, spherical devices held aloft by the smaller human-like figures. I think this is telling a story, Sophia said, not of gods coming from the heavens, but rising from below. As the ROV's lights illuminated more of the carvings, I felt a growing sense of dread. The scenes progressed around the circumference of the pit, showing the tentacled beings spreading outward, interacting with the human figures. In the final panels, the humans appeared to be changing, their forms elongating, their heads reshaping to resemble those of their apparent masters. This isn't mythology, I said slowly. It reads more like a historical record. While we were focused on the carvings, Marcus noticed something on the ROV sensors. There's movement in the pit, he said. We redirected the cameras downward toward the seemingly bottomless shaft. At first, we saw nothing but darkness. Then, as our eyes adjusted to the screen, we noticed a subtle shifting in the water, like heat distortion above hot pavement. Thermal currents, Rivera suggested. No, I replied, my mouth suddenly dry. It's too regular. The distortion was pulsing approximately once every 30 seconds. With each pulse, it seemed to rise slightly higher in the shaft. Pull back, I ordered, the same instinct that had made me withdraw the first ROV now screaming at me to retreat. Marcus began to reverse the ROV, but as it turned, the lights illuminated something rising from the pit, a swirling column of the same microorganisms we'd encountered before. This time, however, they weren't simply a cloud. They moved with clear purpose, maintaining a cohesive form that undulated like a massive tentacle. As we watched in horror, more columns rose from the pit, their movements synchronized in a way that suggested a single controlling intelligence. Get us out of there, Captain Larson shouted. Marcus pushed the ROV to its maximum speed, racing back toward the entrance. The swirling columns pursued, moving with impossible speed through the water. As the ROV cleared the temple entrance, we could see more of the organisms rising from seams throughout the entire structure, as if the whole complex was awakening. The ROV's external temperature sensors spiked dramatically as the organisms brushed against it. Through the camera, we watched as the metal housing began to corrode almost instantly, eaten away by whatever these things were. They're consuming the ROV, Rivera whispered. Unlike our first ROV, we maintained contact long enough to witness our own destruction. The cameras continued to transmit as the organisms enveloped the vehicle, breaking it down into component materials that were absorbed into the swirling mass. The last image we received was of the swarm beginning to take on a more defined shape, something with a central mass and radiating appendages, terrifyingly similar to the carvings we'd seen. Then the signal went dead. The mood on the horizon turned grim. We'd lost both ROVs and had no way to continue direct observation. Captain Larson insisted we leave immediately, but I convinced him to allow us one more day to conduct remote sensing from a safe distance. That night the dreams began for everyone. Breakfast the next morning was a tense affair. Dark circles underlined bloodshot eyes as crew members and researchers alike moved sluggishly, avoiding each other's gaze. It wasn't until Sophia mentioned her strange dream that the floodgates opened. "You dreamed about the structure too?" Marcus asked, his coffee cup freezing halfway to his lips. One by one, we described our dreams. While the details varied, the core experience was the same: walking through the underwater temple without diving equipment, drawn toward the central pit by an irresistible compulsion. Some reported hearing voices speaking in unknown languages. Others described feeling as though their bodies were changing as they moved deeper into the complex. Mass hysteria, Rivera suggested weakly. We all saw the same footage after all, but there were details in each person's dream that couldn't be explained by the footage, architectural elements we hadn't seen, symbols our cameras hadn't captured. Somehow we all had knowledge of the structure that we couldn't possibly possess. Captain Larson listened to our accounts with growing alarm. "We're leaving," he announced. "Now, this expedition is over." No one argued. As the crew prepared to depart, I joined Marcus in the lab for one final review of our data. We were consolidating our findings when he noticed something odd in the sonar readings. "The structure is changing," he said. I looked at the real-time sonar image. The geometric pattern we'd first detected was indeed altering. The spokes, radiating from the central temple, were extending, reaching outward across the seafloor like growing roots or tentacles. "How is that possible?" I whispered. "It's not," Marcus replied. Unless the structure itself is alive," I finished. As we watched, the extensions continued to grow, spreading outward at an alarming rate. "Based on their trajectory, I calculated they would reach the continental shelf within days." "We need to warn someone," Marcus said. "Who would believe us?" I countered. "We barely have evidence of what we've seen, let alone what we think might happen." The ship's engines rumbled to life as Captain Larson prepared to depart. I made the decision to transmit our findings to the Institute's secure server, along with my personal notes and theories. If nothing else, there would be a record. That night, as we steamed away from the site, the dreams intensified. In mine, I finally reached the pit at the center of the temple. Looking down into its depths, I saw not darkness, but a vast network of pulsing, organic machinery that somehow merged technology and biology in ways my mind couldn't comprehend. At the very bottom, something massive stirred, something that had been waiting for a very long time. I woke to screams. Racing to the deck, I found chaos. 2 crew members were restraining a third, a young engineer named Tors, who was attempting to jump overboard. His eyes were wide and vacant, his mouth moving in words that weren't any human language. "It's calling us back," he screamed in English suddenly. "Can't you hear it? We have to go back." It took 3 men to subdue him. Dr. Rivera administered a sedative, and Tors was confined to the medical bay, but he wasn't the last. Over the next 12 hours, 3 more crew members experienced similar episodes. Each described the same compulsion to return to the site, the same sense that something was calling to them personally. Captain Larson pushed the engines to their limit, desperate to put as much distance as possible between us and the structure. But our dreams followed us regardless of physical distance. On the second night of our retreat, I dreamed of the microorganisms we'd encountered. In the dream, I understood what they were: not individual creatures, but components of a vast, distributed intelligence, like neurons in a brain that spanned the ocean floor. They had been dormant, waiting for a stimulus to awaken them. We had provided that stimulus. I woke to find Marcus sitting at the foot of my bed. For a moment, I thought I was still dreaming. Then I noticed the odd angle of his head, the too wide smile. "They're coming, Alina," he said, his voice carrying strange harmonics. "They've been waiting so long, sleeping under the weight of the ocean until the stars aligned again." I scrambled backward against my headboard. "Marcus, what's happened to you?" "Nothing has happened to me," he replied. "I've simply remembered, as you will too, in time." His movements were wrong as he stood, too fluid, as if his joints had additional points of articulation. I noticed a sheen on his skin, a dampness that caught the dim light. "The dreams aren't dreams, Alina," he continued. They're memories filtering into us. The ones who built the temple came from the stars, but they found something already waiting in the deep places of this world. Something older, something patient." I reached for the emergency call button near my bed, but Marcus moved with impossible speed, catching my wrist. His hand was slick and unnaturally cool. "Don't be afraid," he said. "It's a gift. They're going to remake this world, starting with the oceans, starting with us." I wrenched my arm free and scrambled for the door. Behind me, Marcus made no move to follow. His laughter echoed in the corridor as I ran. I found Captain Larson on the bridge, his face gray with exhaustion. When I told him about Marcus, he simply nodded. "It's not just him," he said. 6 more since midnight. We've had to lock them in the cargo hold." "What's happening to them?" I demanded. He turned to me, his eyes hollow. "You're the scientist, you tell me." I had theories, each more terrifying than the last. The microorganisms we'd encountered might be capable of infection, altering human biology or neurochemistry. Or perhaps it was something more esoteric, some form of psychic influence emanating from the structure itself. "We need to contact the mainland," I said. "Request emergency evacuation." "Already tried," Larson replied. "Communications are down, all systems, even the emergency beacon." My blood ran cold. "How is that possible?" He gestured to a maintenance panel that had been removed from the wall. Inside, where electronic components should have been, was a glistening mass of what looked like wet, gray clay. "Found this in all the communication systems," he said, "growing there like some kind of mold." I leaned closer, my scientific curiosity momentarily overriding my fear. The substance pulsed slightly, as if breathing. "Don't touch it," Larson warned. Jensen tried, his hand changed. "Changed how?" Larson just shook his head. By afternoon, half the ship's complement had succumbed to whatever was affecting us. Those still unaffected barricaded themselves on the bridge and in the engine room. We maintained our course toward Iceland, now less than a day away, clinging to the hope of reaching land. That evening the changed ones began to gather on the main deck. I observed them from the safety of the bridge. They stood in a circle, swaying slightly, their movements synchronized. Marcus was at the center, his transformation more advanced than the others. His skin had taken on a grayish hue, and his features seemed to be subtly reorganizing themselves. "What are they doing?" whispered Rivera, who had joined me at the window. "I think they're communing," I replied, "receiving instructions." As if hearing my words, Marcus looked up directly at me. Even at this distance, I could see that his eyes had changed, the pupils elongated into vertical slits. He smiled and raised a hand in greeting. Then, as one, the changed ones moved to the railings and began climbing over the side. "They're going to drown," Rivera cried, but I knew better. "No," I said quietly, "they're going home." One by one they slipped into the dark Atlantic waters. There was no splash, no struggle. They entered the ocean as if returning to their natural environment. Marcus was the last to go. Before he disappeared beneath the waves, he looked up once more and spoke a single word that somehow carried clearly to my ears: "Soon." We reached Reykjavik the following morning with only 11 people remaining from our original complement of 27. The authorities were baffled by our story. Search vessels were dispatched to look for survivors, but I knew they would find nothing. The investigation that followed focused on more rational explanations: mass psychosis, hallucinogens in our water supply, oxygen deprivation. No one wanted to believe what we had actually seen. Our sonar data was dismissed as equipment malfunction. Without the ROVs and their footage, we had little concrete evidence. One by one, the survivors were released after psychological evaluation. Captain Larson retired immediately. Dr. Rivera took a position at an inland university. Sophia disappeared entirely. Her family reported receiving strange letters from her describing plans to join a new community forming along the coast. I alone continued to pursue the truth, gathering what data I could, tracking unusual oceanic phenomena that might be related to the structure. Reports of strange lights beneath the waves, fishing vessels finding their nets filled with unknown species, coastal communities experiencing mass dreams of underwater cities. 3 months after our return, I received an encrypted message from an anonymous source, coordinates for similar structures identified in the Indian Ocean, the South Pacific, and the Mediterranean. All awakening, all growing. Last week I began to dream again, not of the temple this time, but of the world as it will be when the transformation is complete. Oceans rising to claim the land, cities adapted for a new kind of inhabitant. Humanity evolving or devolving into something better suited to the coming age. I wake from these dreams not with fear but with a growing sense of anticipation. I find myself drawn to the water, spending hours staring at the tide pools near my coastal home. Sometimes I think I see tiny organisms in the water moving in familiar patterns, watching me, waiting for me to understand. Yesterday, I noticed webbing beginning to form between my fingers. The skin on my neck feels tender, as if something is developing beneath it. When I cough, there's a salty taste in my mouth. I should be terrified, but instead I feel a strange peace. The ocean is calling me home just as it called Marcus and the others. Soon I will answer. But first I'm leaving this record, not as a warning, it's far too late for that, but as an explanation. What we found wasn't just an ancient structure. It was a hibernation facility, a seed bank, a genesis device left by beings who inhabited this planet long before humans evolved. They retreated into the depths when the last ice age ended, changing the Earth's climate in ways unfavorable to them. They've been waiting for the right conditions to return. Global warming isn't a human-made disaster. It's a terraforming project, millions of years in execution. The seas are rising, the world is warming, everything is proceeding according to their plan. And we, with our curious ROVs and our sonar mapping, simply woke them a little ahead of schedule. I can hear the waves crashing outside my window. They sound like voices now, calling my name. The tide is coming in, and with it my future. The water is waiting, and so are they.